Near the end of King Lear, Edmund and Edgar, the two brothers, fight. And Edmund is stabbed and is in the process of dying. And right near the end of Edmund's life, and Edmund, it's not hard to understand how he became so enraged and how he got on the path that became so destructive. When we see how he's been treated by his father, when we see how society has treated him as a person born outside of marriage. But at the same time, we don't want to excuse what Edmund does. And right at the end, Edmund recognizes that he himself bears responsibility for what's happened. Edmund says, "I pant for life. I want more time in life, but I recognize my time is almost up. Some good I mean to do, despite of mine own nature. Despite who I am," Edmund says, "despite the cruel tendencies that I've developed, despite the fact that I've let, maybe the understandable rage that I have felt, that despite the fact that this rage is understandable, perhaps to some extent, I've let it overcome me, I've let it overtake me, I've let it become a basic element of my nature. Despite that, I mean to do some good. But it's too late. It's too late. Time's up." It's a little bit like Lear. Lear, at the end, recognizes his fault, recognizes that what he did helped to bring about the great catastrophe that we see unfold in this play. But it's too late. It's too late. Edmund has to pay the price for things he did, and it's too late to undo any of it. None of it can be undone. In the case of Cordelia, there's not very much to apologize for. Perhaps when we go back to the beginning of the play and we see Cordelia refusing to play the game that her dad sets out before her and her sisters, perhaps we can critique Cordelia for being a little too direct. Perhaps we can critique Cordelia for being a little too blunt. But when we look at Cordelia's simple honesty, I think it's hard not to be impressed by her when compared to her sisters, Goneril and Regan. Lear recognizes this at the end of the play. He and Cordelia are meeting again near the end of the play, and he says, "If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me," he says to Cordelia, "for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause, they have not." And Goneril and Regan, the kingdom was divided between them. And at the very least, you would expect that they would show some gratitude. They don't. Lear says they don't have cause to hate me, but Cordelia, you do. And Cordelia responds that she has no cause. Now, actually, I think Lear is right here. I think, humanly speaking, Cordelia has a cause. She has reason to be angry. She has reason to not love her father, given everything that's happened. But she shows remarkable grace. She shows remarkable grace, and close to this passage, she tells Lear to raise his hand in benediction, to raise his hand in blessing over her. And then a bit later, there's a very touching scene where Lear tells Cordelia, let's go off together and we'll spend quality time together. We'll have a nice father-daughter relationship. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy, and the play could have had a nice ending there, but it's a tragedy, and so things unravel. The simple point here being that Edmund's rage is understandable when we see how he was treated by his father, when we see how he was treated by the society he grew up in. His rage is understandable, but that rage consumed him. And that rage drove him to do things that were destructive not only for himself, but for many, many other people. Cordelia, the grace that she showed is much more difficult to understand. Her lack of rage, her lack of anger, her lack of a desire to take any kind of revenge. This is harder, actually, for me to understand. The tremendous grace that she shows toward her father is harder to understand, but there is something important in it. Edmund's rage is understandable, but it only led to destructive ends. Cordelia's grace is harder to understand, but it gives us a model of a person who, whatever was going on in her mind, one of the things that it looks like she was doing was just letting things go. Just let it go. Let it go. There's no point in letting anger and regret and rage consume me. That can only lead to negative ends. Let it go. Show grace. Let it go. Show grace. There's something powerful in that. As we go through life and we face our disappointments, sometimes real injustices, well, of course, sometimes the right thing is to respond. I mean, we want to correct injustice. We want to make the world and our little part of the world as good as it can be. But there's also something to be said at the same time for letting go, letting things go, and showing grace. Let it go and show grace. As we survey our world, I think that Edmund's disposition, although not to the extreme that it goes with Edmund, but that disposition of holding on to grudges, holding on to anger, having revengeful thoughts, maybe that's more common than what we see with Cordelia. Let it go and show grace. But as we think about these two examples, which really does lead not only to a better life, probably, but as more and more people do it, to a better society and to a better world. We're not talking here about letting oneself get run over. We're not talking about letting injustices pass unchallenged. But we are talking about the psychological level, the spiritual level, at some point just letting things go and showing grace. How that works out in our own lives, of course, depends on situations and context. I don't know that any clear plan could be set out about how to do this in the individual situations that we find. But I think there's something really useful in Cordelia's example here. She let go and she showed grace.